Hello, Gordon.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
How was your drive here this morning? It's changed, hasn't it?
It's gotten a little bit better. The commute time got cut in half due to a relocation, so
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
happy about that.
So your commute time from your house to Capital Factory, which is in the heart of downtown Austin,
Yeah.
it got cut off and your life has become much easier.
I just got about 5 or 6 or maybe 10 hours back in my week, if you want to think of it that way.
Oh my God! What do you do during those hours? Just
Yeah.
listen to music or think? What do you do?
I'll listen to news. I'll listen to NPR.
Okay.
I also will take advantage of that time to schedule some calls.
Okay.
One of my reserve times that I can predict that I'm probably free is 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning when I'm driving down, and
Okay.
4:30 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon when I'm driving back. So I'll take advantage of the time.
That's awesome. So I know what you do, but for the audience, what do you do over at Capital Factory and how long have you been a part of that?
Let's see. I joined Capital Factory about 5 years ago. And I have the luxury now, after a 29-year professional career, to spend 100% of my time educating, advising, and investing in tech startups. That was kind of my dream. So I don't consider it a job as much as a near full-time hobby. I'm managing director and general partner there. As managing director, I run the Startup Accelerator. As a general partner, I'm a VC. I'm an investor. A lot of fun.
Yeah. And you made that switch 5 years ago, right? Did you join Capital Factory as MD, or did you just work your way through and realize, hey, I should be MD?
As Josh Baer, the founder and executive director, evolved from a summer boot camp accelerator. That's what Capital Factory was in the early days, back to 2009. But around 2012, he and some others invested in the physical property that people know downtown as Capital Factory, a physical thing. That was about the time I connected with him. I had invested in a Capital Factory startup from one of the earlier days of the accelerators. Got me introduced to Josh. He suggested I join as a mentor, which was part of one of my dreams anyway, for my kind of next phase of my professional life. That led to him asking if I would help him revamp the accelerator program instead of a summer boot camp to a totally different structure that's wide open, always running, always accepting applications. And as I helped him through that, he asked if I'd be interested in joining as the first managing director for Capital Factory.
And boom, now Capital Factory is kind of I like that phrase, center of gravity for entrepreneurship in Austin.
Yeah.
So shifting gears a little bit, how many pitches from first-time entrepreneurs do you get a week?
Well, per week, I've estimated that I've seen about 1,500 pitches over the last 15 years or so.
Okay.
It ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
We go through cycles. I think of it maybe more on a monthly basis. It's probably 50 or so a month that I might see. It might be because I'm judging a pitch competition. It might be someone coming in, a batch of interviewees to interview for our accelerator. It's probably on the order of 30 to 50 per month.
So you see in the pitch competitions, you see early stage startups where they're just kind of figuring out the problem and their solution for it. And then on the accelerator side, people who might have traction.
That's right.
With the people who are still thinking about this is my problem and I have an idea of a solution that I can solve it with, what do you see their biggest blind spots that they don't realize that they're missing when they're pitching to you, or even a pitch competition full of people who might want to work for them or with them?
I think the biggest thing that the evolution of a company, to me, goes through certain phases. It goes through testing for desirability, feasibility, and then viability.
Okay.
After viability, you can scale the company and become sustainable, but just let's think of the first 3 phases: desirable, feasible, viable. The startups tend to focus on feasible, which is, can it be built? Can I build this thing?
Yeah.
And their blind spot is they're not testing the market for desirable, which means, does anybody even want this thing? In fact, do they want it so bad that they're willing to pay for it?
Yeah.
So I usually encourage them, do some basic customer discovery and get out there and ask some really tough questions and try and not be an eternal optimist, because entrepreneurs tend to hear a yes when the real answer is either a maybe or a no. So their blind spot is, don't just test for improved feasibility, meaning I can build it, test for desirability.
And how would someone who isn't familiar with this field, who hasn't started a company before, even start thinking about desirability?
Yeah. Well, there are lots of articles, lots of books around this concept of customer discovery. So between concept of customer discovery, which is really interviewing, get out into the market, predict who your ideal buyer persona and user personas are, and get out there and talk to them. Ask them open-ended questions, not yes or no types of questions, because yes or no type questions tend to get more yeses than you really should deserve. But live through a day in their life and try and go through that journey with them.
Absolutely.
Of course, the lean startup methodologies can really, really help with regards to focusing in on that most minimal thing, the minimal viable product concept, which is very well understood now. So I'd say a combination between lean startup, customer discovery, and probably Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1, would be fabulous resources.
I haven't read that one, but I need to. Something I heard, which I really liked, is if you're thinking about your customers and you haven't built it, think about who you're going to advertise to after you've built it and how you're going to advertise to them. Then use those channels to talk to them before you even build it.
Sure.
And just do those interviews, like discover their pain.
That's right. You can apply those marketing techniques into earlier stages. Once you have the product, of course, we identify buyer personas, we speak to that personas, we go through messaging and positioning. You can do that in a hypothetical sense, and in your interviews with customers, essentially you're testing what you think your marketing message might be, or what your pricing might be, or your customer acquisition strategy might be.
So even in those early interviews, do you advise entrepreneurs, early stage, first-time entrepreneurs, to not talk about their solution a lot, but focus more on the problem or how the customer does the job that they want to improve?
It's a little of everything.
Okay.
So I think I would suggest first getting into a day in the life and confirming those pain points, right? You're trying to solve pain. And so there's this analogy of aspirin versus vitamin. And if you're selling a vitamin, you might be making their life healthier. If you're selling an aspirin, you're taking away pain. So part of this at the very beginning of that interview is validating the assumed pain. From there, of course, it does make sense to better understand that, double click on that, get into a day in the life. So how do you do it today? And then that leads into, well, what if I were able to deliver a solution that, and then you fill in the blank, and then you start exploring that.
So thinking about the pain and then testing whether a solution works for it, how many of those 50 pitches that you see a month, in 2 years, if we map that out, how many of the same entrepreneurs are solving that problem in the same way?
Almost none of them.
Yeah.
It might look like a different shade of blue, or the blue might have turned to full-blown purple or even red, right, if you understand the analogy. But never is it the same shade of blue that they started.
And is that something that people don't realize happens a lot?
That's a good question. I believe my feeling is the concept of a pivot is so now well communicated and understood, and I believe first-time entrepreneurs probably understand that it's not a failure to pivot. It's actually rewarded to pivot as early as possible because you have wasted less time. Time is the most valuable resource an entrepreneur has. I mean, by far the most valuable resource for an entrepreneur is time. So that's what we're optimizing, because when they run out of time, i.e. runway, that's when they have to close up shop and they have to go get a regular job.
True. The director of Texas Venture Labs, I'm in his class right now, actually, the MSTC program. Shout out to Mandy, supplied all this. And he says this all the time. You'd rather spend 10% of the effort in the first 3 months figuring out if people are going to pay for it, then you go build it. Otherwise, it's a waste of money.
That's correct.
You've seen entrepreneurship for a while now. And what do you think of this idea in the pop culture of entrepreneurship? Because there's so much content around that. I mean, I have a podcast about entrepreneurship. This idea of the sole founder who has this idea in a dorm in a shower, and 6 years later he or she works his ass off for it, and then it's a success. Do you think that's confirmation bias?
I think it's much like the motivation for young football players admiring their NFL stars, or an Olympic athlete. So pick any kind of sport where you reach kind of a world-class level that can be motivating, inspiring, it can drive you. And I think that's fine. In other words, I think young entrepreneurs, let's even go into high school or college students that see Mark Zuckerberg or others, that they say, wow, I would like to be that. I'd like to do that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's, to me, no different than an even younger child aspiring to be a fireman or a teacher or whatever, because they see a role model that's fine. Go down that path.
Yeah.
I believe many young professionals are served well by giving entrepreneurship a try. When you're young, you have that is your best opportunity to experiment and try different things. You aren't shackled and you aren't burdened by big home mortgages and a family of 3 and other things where you probably do have to really know that you're on a path that can be successful and accomplish your objectives. So I don't have any problem with it at all. I do, however, find many young first-time entrepreneurs essentially solving for, I want to start a startup. And so they turn over rocks and they kind of look for something and they're just kind of looking for a problem to be solved. I find that more often than not, those end up failing because it is much, much, much harder. Did I say much harder? Than entrepreneurs think, first-time entrepreneurs think. And if they don't have a fire in their belly for the problem they're solving, they'll actually give up earlier with this non-passion project than if it is a true passion project. Having said that, I still think giving a try at entrepreneurship can be positive.
Absolutely. So before we jump back into pitches, a question about that fire in the belly, the passion. In your observations over the years, what is that passion which is saying, oh my God, I've seen this problem throughout my life or in the last year or two, and I'm fascinated by it, and I want to solve it right away versus I just had an idea. Like, is it more like slow burning or something that comes to you right away?
I'm not sure there is a more common path to that fire in the belly. However, I do feel like it finds you don't find it. You know what I mean? If you wake up every morning and something's driving you crazy, or if you can complete the following sentence, I absolutely effing hate it when blah. Okay, do you really, really effing hate it, or it's just kind of a nuisance? So I think, like anything, you could use an analogy of a musician or a poet. If I force you to write a song right now, you might be the best songwriter, in the world. But if I say, right now, Moby, within 2 hours or by the end of the day, I need a song, that's not how the best songs were written. The best songs came to somebody at 2 o'clock in the morning through a dream, and they couldn't help themselves but wake up and write those words down. That's my belief. Similar with finding that fire in your belly.
So it's the thing that comes to you again and again.
I think so.
Just randomly.
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
awesome. So back again to pitches. Now, I'm going to put myself in the shoes of a first-time entrepreneur. I have decided on a problem. I'm passionate about it. I've been thinking about it for 2 years. And I come to you and you say, go test the market. And I've talked to people. And then I'm like, okay, it seems that people want to have this. Now what do I do? Do I go out and build it? Do I raise capital? Do I find a co-founder?
Yeah.
I don't know what to do. I can read books. What do I do?
Well, I think you can get down. I describe about one of an entrepreneur's most valuable tools is the compass, not the GPS. Okay, it means get down a directionally correct path pretty quickly. Like just kind of get moving. This doesn't obviate you from the need to actually do some planning, and I'm happy to talk about that as well because I do think it's important. But go ahead and get down a path and use your spidey senses to continue to validate and validate your various assumptions. Because as you get down that path, your list of assumptions is very, very long. So what you're trying to do is validate those assumptions as quickly as possible. So I don't have any problems with kind of starting down a path. Just don't get all the way to the goal line without finishing all of that homework you were supposed to do.
Yeah. One thing I've heard and then I've said a lot in one of my favorite organizations, 3-Day Startup, is no one is going to steal your stupid idea.
Yeah.
That go out and talk to people about
Sure.
your idea, get some feedback.
Sure.
Because if you don't tell them, you will always think that you're right.
That's right. You're whispering in the woods, basically, and nobody is really going to hear what you're saying. Nobody that you would care about or be concerned
Yeah.
with. This is why investors aren't going to sign the silly confidentiality agreement, and it's why, the value you get from talking about this as much as possible and getting as much feedback as possible far outweighs the infinitesimal chance that someone is going to steal your idea and beat you to the punch.
Absolutely, because There's so many ideas out there. You've just got to execute for a long time.
Yeah, 85 people are already working on your idea. Don't be disillusioned. They're working on it in different ways, slightly different shapes and sizes and flavors or whatever. So don't worry about that. Just if you can come up with a solid idea, solid product, solid business plan, it really is going to come down to execution, right? Like, so whoever eventually executes the best is the one that's going to win. It's not necessarily the one that has the best idea first. It's going to end up in an execution match. If you talk about building a company to a exit of 200 million, 500 million, $1 billion, or let's say reaching an IPO, it's about execution. That part's about exexecution.
It's not just the idea that you keep thinking about in your car or shower.
No way.
How many times in the last month, or actually a year, have you heard someone say this? Oh, you know that company? I had that idea 2 years ago.
Sure.
How many times have you done?
I'm a little guilty of that myself, although I am not the 0 to 1 entrepreneur. I do occasionally have ideas, and I'll kind of jot them down. I'll outline a simple business plan. Sometimes I'll see something tangentially related to that, and I'll fall into that trap like, I had an idea just like that. No, it wasn't quite like that, but it happens, and I think that's okay. Nothing wrong with that.
Okay, so we've talked about kind of the blind spots that first-time entrepreneurs can have about their product, and some assumptions about entrepreneurship that they might have, like people might steal my idea, or oh my god, this is so unique.
Yes.
Jumping into, I've done some customer discovery. I've talked to my customers, and I might have a prototype, it might be pen and paper, and now I'm thinking, I need a co-founder. Why is it important to have a team rather than be a sole founder? Because I've heard that a lot.
A lot of people think it's because of the workload that happens, right? When you're a solo entrepreneur, you're of course wearing every hat. It is a little bit partly about splitting duties and being more efficient and more effective and moving a little bit faster. It's also about complementing your skills. I'm going to talk about first-time entrepreneurs, and when I say first-time entrepreneurs, that usually means young entrepreneurs. There are, of course, people like me. I'm 52 years old, and yes, I might quit my career and try my hand at entrepreneurship, but I think mostly we're talking about young entrepreneurs, and when you're a young entrepreneur, your skills and experience, of course, are limited. Even if you did have a few years of a job, it would have been probably in a singular function. So you have a lot of blind spots and naivete regarding what can be done and how to do things. So you hear of the technical co-founder and the business co-founder. Well, at least what you're trying to do there is recognize that it's less likely the business co-founder is super steeped in the technology aspects and vice versa. I actually think the biggest advantage of the co-founder is to get a different way of thinking. You think differently than I do. Your personality is different than mine. I might be a little on the conservative side. You might be on the aggressive side. And the debates that you and I have are actually the most valuable attribute of two co-founders instead of you just doing it your way. By me bringing my perspectives and my methods and my experiences, you will be strong. Together we will be stronger and have higher odds of success.
And how much of that is just the emotional support when it's 1 a.m. and you're like, oh my god, I don't know if this is going to last another month. How much of that helps? How much of having a partner helps with that?
That's right. In that way, it's much like any relationship.
Yeah.
Two people that are in a serious relationship. Because as your co-founders, you're not quite married, but you're probably
kind of married.
You're engaged at least. Well, let's say you're engaged. And the example that you gave is a little bit more like the way relationships are. If I'm having a down day, my wife picks me up, and vice versa. If I'm charging down, I'm a competitor in swimming and whatnot, and if I'm kind of losing motivation before a national championship, and I don't think I'm going to go swim workout today. My wife might say, well, hey, nationals are 30 days away. You set a goal for this kind of time. Do you really want it? So in that way, you're supporting each other, and you're hoping that both of you aren't having super down days or down weeks and both want to quit. That might be telling. You're hoping that if one's down, the other one's up.
Yeah. Can you tell? So a lot of co-founder relationships do go south. Can you tell after 30 minutes with a team that there is a deep communication problem here?
It's hard. it is one of the hardest things to test for, and that's because we as human beings are able to put on a particular face. You know, when you're in there selling to a customer, the best salespeople are able to have their company come across as much bigger and much further along than they are, and the product is much stronger and less bug-free, right, or more bug-free. And in that way, when two co-founders are pitching investors or maybe pitching me to join our accelerator, they have their Sunday suit on, and they're looking sharp, and they're keying off each other, and they're lovey-dovey, to use the couple analogy. But in reality, we know couples have fights too. So what I try to do is I try to ask some questions to tease out, hey, tell me about a recent argument where maybe you thought the company should go left and you thought the company should go right. Surely that's happened in the last month. Just tell me about one of those situations. And I'll keep kind of pressing a little bit like, no, come on, Joe. You really disagreed with Sally on this one. Like, did you get into a knockdown drag out? And I don't need to dig into your personal business, but I'm really trying to understand, how do you handle crucial conversations and very, very difficult decisions? I try to test for it because I've had, of my angel investing portfolio of about 14 investments, 4 or 5 have already died. And a majority of those that died, I can point to what I call co-founder funk as a significant contributing factor. So it is important.
How, and as you probably know, we're kind of jumping from one topic in the kind of a roadmap, like in a direction. I'm really fascinated by this. How can you even and this maybe is going into relationships, but how do you know if the partner you pick for a startup is the right one? Because if your relationship with them screws up, it's over. That's or right. You have to start from scratch.
Yeah. It is the risk of trying to find a co-founder by going to a happy hour and assuming that just with a handshake and a 20-minute conversation, you're going to find a co-founder. You might. And there's nothing wrong with using that to kind of come up with potential candidates, but it's very similar to assuming you're going to meet your meet your spouse and make a decision about getting married from meeting them in a bar and one date or something. Of course, love at first sight does happen. You hear about it. More often than not, you date for a year or 2 or 5. Now, I already mentioned that a startup's most valuable resource is time, so we don't have a year or 2 or 5 to find our co-founder. This is why a lot of times the more successful co-founding teams have known each other, or the recommendations from others that know them kind of are helping to do a personality match. Back to relationships, if I'm gonna recommend a potential mate for you, the better I know you, the better I'm probably going to do on introducing you to someone that could be a future mate, right? No magic ingredients, but it's really, really hard.
I heard this from one of my friends, Socket, where he said, build yourself up before you need it. He was talking about having a support network before you go out and you screw up and then you're like calling people. So even before you start, right now, if you don't have an idea, if you're not working on something, but you're still interested in entrepreneurship, you could start building your network right now.
That's right.
Go to happy hour so that you might know that person for a year.
That's right. And there's the other beauty in this particular regard is very few first-time entrepreneurs have the capital resources to bring on a very early team, even just 1 or 2 co-founders full-time and pay them. So many times in that bootstrap phase, it's part-time work. So you get a chance to try before you buy. We're working on this idea, but both of us have paying jobs because we have to pay the bills. We're working on this on nights and weekends, and we're getting to know each other over the course of these 2 months, 3 months, maybe 6 months before we finally convince somebody to give us a little bit of money, and then one of us can come on full time, but we're still getting to know each other. So you do have a honeymoon period, to use the analogy.
Yeah, and no wonder there's so many events that are called co-founder dating. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So now, again, putting myself in the shoes of a first-time entrepreneur, I have thought about my problem. I've thought about my solution, and I'm doing a B2B business. And I'm talking to 2 people about, hey, I'm interested. Are you interested? I've done an MBA, and you know programming. This is cool, right? and I get an email from two people, or kind of a verbal thing that, hey, when you build that product, let me know. I might just buy it. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I can quit my job and be rich and all of that. Now what? When I start building it on the side, and I think I have 2-3 potential customers I can sell it to, but I don't have enough money to build past the MVP. What do I do? Do I start pitch competitions, go pitch to investors?
Well, this is where the friends and family round is so popular. And it's because it takes so little capital to get a product in the market that angel investors usually are waiting until you've got a shipping product and your first customers. Or maybe really, really, really close. But your question is even earlier than that, right? And this is why the friends and family, they know you, they trust you. Part of it, of course, is they want to support your journey. And if they have the financial means to do that, as long as you'll explain to them that the odds are kind of high, probably pretty high, that you're not going to ever give them their money back, and if they still would like to support your journey, then that's okay. But they know you, and that's why 50,000 or 100,000 from friends and family is actually fairly common. First-time entrepreneurs don't have the financial resources to do it themselves. They're too early in their financial career. So that's perhaps a way of getting a little bit of money. If you can build kind of a semi-crappy MVP, but that solves a significant pain, you might actually be able to get some customers to pay you a little bit of money for this crappy MVP. Not a lot of money, but that by itself is validating to early investors. The fact that you took this crappy looking thing and convinced somebody to pay you a little bit of money for it. Crowdfunding could come in, right? Not every product is suitable for a crowdfunding campaign. But by putting this idea up there and letting the crowd decide if they want it and give you a little bit of money, well, could you raise $25,000 or $100,000 on some crowdfunding portal? Now you got a little bit of money, and you have validation for those angel investors that said, without even building it, I raised this much money.
Revenue is the best source of funding.
Yeah, for sure it is. Absolutely, non-dilutive and validating.
Exactly. Let me think about this. So if I have a company and I'm at that stage where, yes, people are going to say that people are saying, I'm going to buy your MVP. Is it wrong for me to just say, okay, I need investment right now, or should I focus on bootstrapping? Is that difference between saying I'm going to go after investing versus I'm going to bootstrap it and raise from my customers, is that more of a based on the person value, like the entrepreneur's values, or more of a, okay, I just can't build this company in the first year without $2 million right now?
Yeah. I think it depends on the severity of the pain and your efficacy on alleviating the pain. What I'm saying is, for the customer to part with their money and put it into your pocket instead of keeping it in theirs, I think it has to be a pretty significant pain, right? Now, the crowdfunding offerings, usually it's not that much money that they're contributing, but if I have a particular cancer and you tell me that you're 6 months away from solving that, and I have a chance to be one of the first 10 to receive that treatment, but I need to give you $1,000 first, okay, that's probably something I'm going to consider. If it's a lightweight thing that kind of makes my life a little bit better, well, I'm not going to give you $1,000 and hope that you actually build it, just to maybe be in your first 10. So I think maybe that's where it falls down in terms of being able to get customers to part with their money before you actually deliver a product.
Yeah. And what was I thinking? You said something which sparked something in my head. I forgot. Anyway, so it's time to execute, right? Yes, I just got 10K, 20K from early customers, 2 to 5, awesome. And I'm excited. My work ethic is fantastic right now. My co-founder comes over after my full-time job, or I might even have quit, and I have some savings. What blind spots exist right now when I'm almost about to bring out my MVP?
I think probably if I'm going to predict a couple of your first blind spots, the first one is you are focused on building a product, not a company. And you feel like, now that I've built this product, okay, I'm there. No, you have a product, you don't have a company. And to build it, and by the way, that is something investors care about. Investors care about you building a successful company, not a successful product. So it's another blind spot in your dialogue with investors.
What's the difference?
A company is a business plan, and a business plan has a market and a problem solved and a target customer and a customer acquisition strategy, and it does have a product that you sell for a certain price. It has a support model. It has a plan for scaling the business beyond just 2 or 3 or 5 customers, but getting to thousands or tens of thousands of customers. You know, a company is people, and a company has a culture, and a company has a management system, and a company has physical offices and reporting and metrics and oversight with boards of directors. I mean, that's a company. And a product is just such a small but super important sliver of that. But it's just a portion of the company. So to me, it starts with strategy. And there was a guy named Dr. Chen that was a former chairman or CEO of TSMC, a semiconductor company, that said, strategy without execution is pointless, but execution without strategy is aimless. And where does strategy come from? I think strategy comes from just basic planning. And entrepreneurs, most of them don't want to plan. In fact, entrepreneurs hear this adage of, don't waste your time on a business plan. And what that means is we used to write 40 and 50-page business plans before we could get funded, and we don't do that anymore, right? The business plan is in a pitch deck. But I wrote an article that's titled, "Don't waste your time on a business plan," in quotes, doesn't mean don't plan.
Yeah.
And Ben Franklin is the one that said, if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. And so I do believe there is a planning element to this, and I do also believe startups can get down this directionally correct path while they are planning this company. Mm-hmm. So it's a big blind spot. You've got to figure out how to do some planning, and this is where advisors can help you, because young entrepreneurs, they don't know what planning sessions look like. How do I do a strategy session? How do I do a plan? We'll get some advisors to help you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like, you constantly have to learn. So if you're a technical founder and 3 months down the line, someone says to you, hey, we need some revenue model. You're like, where do I go? But that's where things like Capital Factory,
that's right,
meetups, and even people who've done this before come in. Throughout this kind of a roadmap, how important is coaching at every step of the way?
It's one of the biggest advantages that the entrepreneurial scene has seen evolve over the last, let's say, decade or so. 10 years ago, the concepts of incubators and co-working spaces with accelerator programs and this concept of startup mentoring, and formal advising. I've been advising startups for about 17 years, so of course I knew the concept of being an advisor to a startup, but it is so prolific now. They're all over the place. And yes, there's good advisors and bad advisors, and you get to decide what good versus bad means, but there are a lot of them. There are programs you can join, there are boot camps you can go through, there are meetups that you can participate in. I produced a video library called Founders Academy that's out there. There's resources galore, and that didn't exist 10 or 20 years ago. And so shame on a first-time entrepreneur for not tapping into that. You got to go beyond reading textbooks. I mentioned, 0 to 1 is a fabulous book, and there's lots of others. But wow, there is nothing better than real personal coaching and advice from someone that's been in the trenches, has scars in their back, can tell stories, can ask you difficult questions. Very valuable.
Absolutely. There's so much information out there that if you come in front of an investor and they ask you about your business structure, if you say, I don't know, that means you haven't searched on YouTube.
That's right.
Yeah, you have a huge library of videos around that. Shockwave Innovations?
Yeah. I don't know how this happened actually, but as I give advice, this goes back about 15 years ago, if I was asked the same question twice over some period of time, I decided, well, I'll just write it down. Okay? If more than once somebody's asked me, how do I write a business plan? Okay, I'm just going to write down what are Gordon's theories on writing a business plan. So I started publishing, documents and articles. This is before the days of blogging. Of course, that turned into a blog. I've now got about 150 or 160 articles that are published at Shockwave Innovations. I found that it's a personal passion. What I like about it is it's a test for me. It's a test to figure out, what do I know or think I know? Is it interesting? Is it valuable? Can I communicate it in a way that's consumable by others that haven't been in that movie before? So it's a test for me, but now I've built up all this content that then translated into producing a video library, by the name Founders Academy. It's got more than 40 modules of video. There's some universities that are using it to replace the entrepreneurship textbook. It's a passion project.
Absolutely, and it's very comprehensive.
Thank you.
Yes. So, and back to that execution part, and you mentioned the blind spot that is, investors are looking for a company and not a product.
Yeah.
What are the most common elements of a company that investors prod on and be like, tell me more about that? No, give me more details that entrepreneurs may not think of on their first go.
Well, so let's go back to the evolution of the company that I mentioned. We talked about desirable, feasible, viable. When you're talking to investors, they are mostly testing for viability. They're testing for a lot of things. They're testing for the founding team, and do they have drive and passion? Are they smart? And all those kind of things. But from really, am I going to get a return on my investment? Is there a chance that I'm going to get my money back, or hopefully a lot better? I need to know, is there a viable business here? When we talk about viable businesses, we're not talking about, can this be a $1 billion company? We're just talking about basic viability. Can I come up with, or can this startup come up with, a customer acquisition method that is efficient and effective enough to achieve lifetime value from a customer that is considerably greater than the cost to acquire the customer? It's the LTV greater than CAC, greater than customer acquisition cost. And of course, 3 times and 5 times greater is better than just 1.2 times greater. But that's one of the biggest things that they're going to double click into, is how are you going to acquire customers? And don't just say we're going to do some Facebook ads. No, give them more on that. Is this a zero touch acquisition, light touch? Is it heavy touch? What methods are you going to use? What have you tested so far? Why do you think this is an efficient way to acquire customers? It usually doesn't work out like the startup thinks it will. This is why investors are also testing for market size. Larger markets allow you to pivot and adjust. You thought you were going to sell into the high end of the market with a heavy touch sales model. Oops, that's not working. So a downscaled version of the product sold to small, medium business with inside sales could work. Slightly different customer target, slightly different industry, slightly different use case. This is what large markets bring us. So I think testing for viability and market size are a couple key things.
And customer acquisition, how does that change from the first 6 months, where you're kind of talking to 5-10 customers and you've built something? We're 18 months into this journey, and now people are asking me, tell me your customer acquisition journey for the next year. How does that change? How does the scale of that change?
That's right. So it starts with the founders serving as the sales team. Remember, it's just you and me, and maybe we hired 1 or 2 others, but if we hired 1 or 2 others, they were probably engineers. They probably weren't salespeople. We usually don't hire salespeople first. I actually think it's good for the founders to be the first salespeople. The valuable insights that you gain, and having doors shut in your face and hearing those objections directly from the customers. Now, if you're self-service, then we don't get quite that advantage. If we're self-service, we're not hearing from the customers as much, but there maybe are different ways to get that feedback. What you're talking about here is now we're a year or 18 months into it. We have convinced customers to buy it, and we feel like we do have some viability. Now what we're moving is to the next phase, which is scalability. Can we scale this company? The final stage is sustainability, right? So we are viable, then we're scalable, and finally, if we make this work, we're sustainable. It's possible that we build a sustainable business that's not scalable, and that's what we call a lifestyle business. I can sustain this forever, but it's only going to make $10,000 a month. It's interesting income, but it's not going to be a $1 billion company. But let's put that aside. When we move to scalability, now we're scaling that customer acquisition model. And if it's self-service, it means we're dialing up those inbound marketing programs. We're finding ways to be more efficient of moving them through the funnel and nurturing them, and having lower dropout rates or abandonment rates when they get to the shopping cart, if you will. If it's a sales organization, we are refining and enhancing our sales process and our sales methodology. We're bringing in tools like Salesforce.com or HubSpot to do marketing automation. we're building a machine. We're building a well-oiled customer acquisition machine. That's how you scale.
And then how many companies? So I can imagine myself thinking, okay, it's been 2 years, and I know we're jumping the roadmap. I just love thinking in terms of this kind of timeline. It's been 2 years. I've been able to raise money. I'm growing, but how many companies still fail after that 2-year mark?
Well, I think of it a little less than time duration and more on maybe revenue plateaus, right? Because I've seen many startups go into what I'll refer to as cockroach mode. And it's not my term. I stole it from somebody that I don't know and can't give credit to. But I've seen companies go into cockroach mode for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years.
Survive?
Absolutely. I'm on the board of directors of a company that we're 5 years into it, and we've just finally now gotten on good footing. We had to go into cockroach mode because our customer acquisition model was massively broken. We couldn't afford the sales model that was needed to convince the customers that we targeted to buy. So we had to scale way back and go very, very slow. Now we've finally reached a good point and we're going to start dialing up. That took 5 years. So it's a little less about, and this company's going to be fine. I feel good about the company, but it took 5 years. I think it's more, a startup might think once they get to $1 million in revenue, I got it, and they really celebrate $1 million. And it's kind of funny, and I find that I live in this world now, and I do also celebrate getting to $1 million. Wow, the odds of succeeding now when you've gotten to $1 million are dramatically improved. But boy, you have not made it at all, believe me. I joined a company at $4 or $5 million of revenue. We grew it over a few years to 36 and took it public. But wow, the challenges that we hit along the way, and we were losing money at certain time. We could have crashed and burned as a $20 million company. You go through big recessions. We went through the 2000-2001 dot-com crash, almost killed the company, but luckily we survived. So there's all of these factors that can cause you to go sideways after reaching $1 million.
Just when you think you've become strong, someone stronger comes and punches you in the face?
Absolutely. The world changes, and the other thing that happens is you're a $10 million company, and especially as you're a 30 to 50, the way you operate is very, very different. You will have a turnover in the management team. It's very unlikely that these glass-breaking entrepreneurs that started the company will have the personality and the skills and the management style to successfully to carry the company through those phases. It does happen, and of course we love to celebrate the Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerbergs of the world that were able to hold on to the company. That's 1/1000th of 1%. So even those kind of things, like a total change out of the management company, management system, that can be a big disruption that can take you sideways.
You can never know what's going to happen.
It is never easy. It's easy after you've sold your company for $500 million and you've taken a couple months off and now your heart rate's back to normal. Then it's easy for a little while.
Yeah.
Until then, it is just hard in different ways. So get used to hard.
Get used to hard. What's the last piece of advice you'd like to leave listeners with, or even viewers actually? We've got this great setup.
That's a good question. I do have a lot of advice. I think one other piece of advice, I commonly give this. I find that entrepreneurs, one of their blind spots is this infatuation with dilution. You and I start out, we're 50-50, and I get this 50% ownership etched into my brain for some reason, and I somehow can't realize that over time, when we build this great company, it's worth $500 million, I'm not going to have 50% of it. But for some reason, when we're 50-50, I kind of imagine maybe I'll have 30% and we'll exit 30% of $500 million. Wow, how much money the island I'm going to be able to buy. And so we get hyper-focused and infatuated with dilution, and we lose sight of optimizing for growth instead of dilution. And I say this because we might be facing 3 potential investors that want to fund our company. This one dilutes us 21%, this one would dilute us 22%, and this offer dilutes us 30%. And we get infatuated with this difference between 20% and 21. Maybe the investor that dilutes us 21% is the best partner that really has resources and networks and other success stories in our industry. And What I tell an entrepreneur in those cases is optimize for growth, not dilution. Now, this 30% or 40% dilution, well, yeah, that might be ridiculous. So I'm not saying don't think about it, but optimize for growth, not dilution, if we're down to minuscule percentages.
Yeah, better to have a smaller piece of a actual existing pie than the whole piece of a pie that doesn't exist except in your head.
The only equity percentage, in other words, the number sign next to your name with a percentage sign after it, the only time that really matters is when we exit, and having a $500 million exit versus a little $10 million punch out, okay, big difference, right?
Yeah. Thank you so much for this, Gordon. This was a pleasure.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.